Have you ever seen two military fighter jets escort a prisoner transfer? Have you ever seen a bomb-proof safe made of 1-foot-thick high-density steel used to transport a prisoner? Who could be so dangerous? It's none other than the infamous arms dealer queen, a woman facing 105 criminal charges. She is being transported to a secret base, where three high-ranking officials have been waiting for some time. The three tell her that no matter how powerful she is, there's no escape from here. They demand she writes down her contacts in Angola. Elena calmly picks up the pen and paper, but a subtle smile appears on her face. Meanwhile, in a bank in New York City, a group of mercenaries is slowly putting on their masks. Armed with heavy weapons, they take control of all the hostages. The leader presses a switch. The man pulls out a note and shows it to the security camera, the message quickly reaching the FBI director at the secret base. The surveillance photos are then sent to Robert. The woman hands the written note to Isaac, which says, "Check your pocket." Isaac, puzzled, reaches into his pocket and indeed finds a letter. Keep in mind, Isaac is the U.S. Attorney General, and she somehow managed to slip a letter into his pocket without him knowing. At that moment, Robert shows the woman the surveillance photo, which reads, "Bow to your queen." The woman gives Isaac a look. A confused Isaac opens the envelope and sees the words, "I am queen." Isaac quickly identifies the traitor who planted the letter, but he still has no clue about Elena's ultimate plan. Police quickly surround the bank. Isaac smugly tells Elena that it's just a small-time bank heist, and her people have already been taken down. Elena, however, responds with authority.
Well, let's see if the next one will have a kick.
Sure enough, another storm is brewing elsewhere in New York City. In broad daylight, three masked mercenaries boldly storm another bank. Special Agent Val, who has dealt with Elena before, understands her methods and advises her superiors to immediately lock down the entire city and implement a defense plan for all 765 banks. The superiors think she's overreacting. Clearly unaware of the gravity of the situation, Val suspects Elena's next target might be the bank communications center and rushes there with her assistant. Just as they arrive, the building above them explodes. The two quickly draw their guns and move forward. At that moment, a masked man begins walking toward them from behind a glass wall. Soon, the radio reports that a fourth bank has been hijacked, followed closely by a fifth, sending the entire city of New York into panic. In the second bank that was taken, SWAT plans to infiltrate through the underground ventilation system to rescue the hostages. But as the SWAT team prepares to open the vent, the beeping from the side catches their attention. The mercenaries had thoroughly studied the bank and were fully aware of their actions. A powerful explosion destroyed the entire underground, causing heavy casualties among the police. The live footage is streamed to the secret base, and the three ministers begin to panic. Meanwhile, this woman exudes the confidence of someone who is in complete control. Quietly anticipating the next move, Val suspects that Elena's ultimate target might be the Federal Reserve Bank and heads there first. SWAT will follow shortly, and indeed, they encounter Elena's men at the scene. At the same time, a SWAT armored vehicle arrives, and Val signals the SWAT team to cover the nearby civilians, then calls Anthony at the command center. But Anthony receives a call from the SWAT team informing him that the backup is stuck in traffic and can't arrive in time. Val then realizes that the SWAT team in front of her is fake, and the woman they've kidnapped turns out to be the daughter of a Saudi industrial tycoon and a board member of the Federal Reserve Bank. Her biometric technology can open the Federal Reserve Vault, and inside the Federal Reserve Vault lies a staggering 6,000 tons of gold. Inside the third bank that was taken over, two mercenaries installed the bomb and were preparing to blow open the vault in front of them, because behind the wall is another bank's vault, which holds top-secret government documents. Among them are the secrets that Minister Isaac wants to keep hidden. At this moment, Elena's mercenaries hacked into the secret base's computer to live stream, and as Isaac watched, he began to feel uneasy. Seeing Elena's smug expression, he started to panic. Elena calmly crossed her long legs, while the frustrated Isaac began to threaten her with torture if she didn't stop. Meanwhile, the mercenaries successfully entered the vault, which was the seventh bank. The captain confidently pried open a specific safety deposit box, and Isaac panicked. Elena generously offered him a suggestion.
I suggest you resign immediately.
I'm gonna decline that suggestion and give you one of my own. Shove it up your...
Suddenly, the sound of glass being tapped interrupted him. When he turned around, Minister Isaac's private vault had already been opened. Isaac's face turned pale, and Elena started to mock him.
But there are other things in that safe deposit box you don't want public. Crypto keys, proof of embezzlement, zip drive photos of Miss Batista.
The vault hadn't even been opened, yet Elena already knew what was inside. Could it be that this elaborate heist of 7 banks wasn't about stealing money, but simply about blackmailing Isaac? The director next to him was surprised, but Elena continued calmly. At that moment, Special Agent Val was visiting a prison where her husband, a former detective, had been framed and sentenced to 10 years. Just as Val left the prison, Elena's lawyer found her. The lawyer succinctly stated that if Val cooperated, Elena had the power to free her husband, because it was Elena who orchestrated her husband's imprisonment. Hearing this, Val was clearly enraged and was ready to draw her gun and arrest him. The lawyer, with a resigned expression, pointed out that a sniper rifle had already targeted her. The lawyer advised Val to think it over and then walked away confidently. Val returned to the base, believing that after years of pursuing Elena, she knew her well. Elena, however, stated that Val didn't know her well enough, and began to calmly recount a story. A father and daughter were watching pigeons through a telescope when suddenly a car caught the girl's attention. The father handed the girl a rocket launcher and told her, "Blow up the car, and you'll be all grown up." The girl raised the launcher, aimed at the car, and fired without hesitation. The car was blown away instantly. When they arrived at the scene, they found a terrified, injured little girl crouching there. The father handed his daughter a knife, telling her, "In this world of the survival of the fittest, you must kill her to survive." The girl took the knife and, trembling, walked toward the injured girl. She held the knife with both hands and, with all her strength, stabbed the injured girl, her eyes cold as ice. Just when Val thought this cruel girl was the present-day Elena, Elena slowly lifted her shirt to reveal a scar on her abdomen. It turned out that the girl in the car was actually Elena, who escaped after the car was blown up. The injured girl had fled to the side but was eventually found by the father and daughter. Val, being observant, noticed stretch marks near Elena's scar, indicating that Elena had given birth. Val seemed to realize something. Could all of this be connected to a man? The scene shifts to the maximum security prison where Val's husband was sitting. Next to him was a man with a tattoo identical to Elena's. This man was Elena's husband, Sergei. However, according to police records, this man was executed a year and a half ago. Val was still in the dark, while Elena made a cryptic remark.
Emotion will eclipse you, the FBI, the government. You're going to learn a lot, Agent Turner. I have another story to tell you.
The boy was walking down the street talking on his phone when suddenly a group of masked robbers rushed out of a car. They kidnapped the boy and strapped a timed bomb to him. He was Elena's next target. Back at the secret base, where there were once 3 arrogant officials, only 2 remained, as Isaac had been stripped of his powers. Suddenly, the surveillance feed was hacked again, and the footage switched directly to the crime scene. The moment the hood was removed, Roxanne panicked. The man strapped with bombs was her son. An enraged Roxanne rushed down to confront Elena, demanding to know her purpose. Elena responded with authority.
I'll settle for some new clothes.
If anything happens to him, I'll hang you myself.
Put her in prison orange.
The FBI was not just sitting around either, and soon the police tracked down the vehicle used by the kidnappers. Val rushed to the scene and found the suspect vehicle inside a truck. The location was very familiar to her because her deceased mother was buried there. Val was certain that the kidnapped man was nearby. Sure enough, based on the stone walls and floors seen in the video, they found the minister's son in a basement. Upon inspection, they discovered that it was a shrapnel bomb with the potential for mass destruction. If it exploded, everyone in the vicinity would be killed. The bomb squad said it would take 6 minutes to forcibly defuse the bomb using plasma technology, but there were less than 3 minutes left on the timer. Fortunately, the timer had a keypad, and entering the correct password could disarm the bomb, but there were no hints for the password. Robert warned her that if the bomb went off, she would lose all leverage in negotiations. Elena, however, responded calmly.
I don't think well in polyester.
Val told the man that the kidnapper's target was his mother, so the password was likely related to her. In a panic, the man remembered that he had once sold heroin, and after being arrested, his mother, the minister, made a single call that got him released. At the time, the case was codenamed Snowman, but the password still didn't work, and time was running out.
Mom's buried here. The B-I-G-B-Y.
Anthony ran over to ask Val how she could guess the password. Val told him that everything Elena did was carefully planned. The bomb site was the grave of her own mother, and the person behind it all was her mother's killer. The reason they were able to successfully disarm the bomb was that Elena deliberately gave them a clue. Val believed that this bank heist was just the beginning, and that Elena had been planning for years. with a much larger political conspiracy hidden behind it. However, while they were discussing this, a major event was quietly unfolding inside the second bank that had been taken over in New York City. This bank had been under the control of the robbers for 2 days, and a large number of media outlets had gathered around the area. The police were observing every move inside through a hidden camera, and the robbers were hacking the servers and copying files onto a flash drive. The acting director ordered the power and network to be cut off, but the robbers managed to complete the data transfer just before the blackout. The power outage caused panic among the people in the hall. The bank manager stood up and told the robbers that they needed food and water, but the robber grabbed his arm, pinned him against the wall, pointed a gun at his head, and told him not to get too excited. Then, he handed the manager a tray of candy, and the manager had no choice but to obediently start eating the lollipop. However, it wasn't long before a man started sweating profusely. The robber noticed and walked over to him. It didn't seem like the man was faking it. The police began negotiating with the robbers, hoping they would release the sick hostage. The bank manager looked pale and was struggling to breathe. The robbers, not being completely heartless, allowed the sick man to be taken out. The sheriff took this opportunity to try to talk to the masked woman. Even though the robbers were extremely cautious, the police secretly recorded the conversation and handed it over to the technical department for analysis. In the ambulance, the officer was about to perform an EKG on the sick man. He removed a patch from the man's arm, and the man, who had been sweating and struggling to breathe, suddenly started breathing normally again. It turned out that this was the real cause of the man's illness, and he was obviously part of the plan. His goal was to smuggle the flash drive containing important data out of the bank. The robbers' plan seemed flawless, but just as the insider cop was about to quietly leave with the flash drive, Val acted quickly and intercepted it just in time. However, what she didn't realize was that everything was still under Elena's control. A young couple was about to walk down the aisle, with all their friends and family waiting in the church. The two embraced excitedly, but the next moment, a sudden explosion occurred. Everyone, including the mother-in-law, was killed instantly, and the husband, Sergei, sat beside his mother in utter despair. Although Elena was also deeply grieved, she remained calm. She told her husband that only by staying alive could they have a chance for revenge. At this moment, Val arrived at the secret base with the intercepted flash drive. After connecting it to the mainframe, the big screen displayed the image of a drug lord. But what followed shocked everyone. It was Roxanne. The video clearly recorded a conversation between the police and criminals, and the minister was visibly shaken by this sudden revelation. However, she calmly told Robert that the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security colluding with a gang would undoubtedly cause nationwide panic if it got out. She suggested downplaying the incident and stated that she would voluntarily resign soon, citing family reasons, but Robert firmly refused. By this point, 2 of the 3 interrogators were already out of the picture. Meanwhile, Anthony discovered a mysterious box in Val's car. Inside, along with Elena's clothes, was a photograph. Val took the photo and confronted Elena, demanding to know why she and her husband were dragged into this. To uncover the truth, Val returned to the prison, hoping to get some valuable information from her husband, Owen. But Owen simply told her, "You're no match for Elena. Just give up." Owen returned to his cell and met with Elena's husband, Sergei. Later, Sergei went back to his own cell, took a phone out from under his mattress, and appeared to be sending a message, laughing maniacally. Back at the base, Elena, now dressed in a new outfit, quietly watched the blinking signal frequencies in the control room, as if she had received some information. This was a new move by Elena. Her mercenaries had hacked into New York City's news channels. Elena's face suddenly appeared on the big screen in Times Square. A mercenary locked a female hostage inside the bank's vault. The air inside the vault would run out in 4 hours. When the timer ran out, the hostage would suffocate to death. Elena demanded that CNN news anchor Anderson be sent to the bank to negotiate. If Mr. Anderson refused, or if the FBI didn't allow him to go in, the hostage would suffocate. The police were monitoring everything inside the bank through a hidden camera. Under public pressure, the police had no choice but to bring Anderson, Indiana, wearing a bulletproof vest. He was brought into the bank. The mercenaries live-streamed the entire negotiation, demanding that he speak about the Swan. Anderson claimed he knew nothing about it, and everyone at the FBI was just as puzzled, as Anthony and Val desperately searched for a lead. Smoke rising in the distance caught their attention. Checking the fire department's network, they discovered that the fire was at a warehouse. Val suddenly remembered something Elena had said. The name of the warehouse, in Russian, meant the Swan. the very thing the mercenaries had mentioned. The two rushed to the scene, but it turned out to be just a regular fire caused by old wiring. Just as they thought it was a wasted trip, a foul smell caught their attention. Following the scent, they entered the warehouse and found a refrigerator. When they opened it, they were stunned. The police quickly identified the victim as a journalist named Ming Li. However, the record showed that Ming Li had jumped off the Manhattan Bridge 2 years ago, and his body had never been found. Based on Elena's methods, Val believed the body must be connected to Anderson in some way. However, there was no evidence, and Anderson refused to provide any clues. Meanwhile, the acting director was requesting approval from higher-ups to launch an attack using Aiken gas, even though they knew this method could harm the hostages. Back at the secret base, the FBI director began negotiating with Elena. The police found some clues through a photograph. The photo was taken in Argentina in 2016, where Val's husband, Owen, was on an undercover mission, conducting a deal with Elena and her husband. Owen was using an alias, and a suspicious man caught Elena's attention. Suddenly, a man pulled out an MP5 and started shooting at them. Elena immediately found cover and returned fire. Seeing that the ambush had failed, the assassin grabbed a hostage as a shield and tried to retreat. Elena calmly aimed and shot, taking down the assassin. Unfortunately, Owen was also injured in the crossfire. When Owen woke up, he found himself in Elena's home. At the same time, Elena discovered his undercover identity. Back in the present, the oxygen levels inside the vault were rapidly depleting. The trapped hostages were barely hanging on, and the police were urgently formulating a rescue plan. Based on the clues Elena had provided, Val believed that news anchor Anderson must have committed an unforgivable crime. However, Anderson refused to confess, and the situation reached a stalemate. The police decided to open the ventilation system, planning to release the gas for a forced entry, but before the operation could begin, the robbers blindfolded all the hostages. Then, the high-voltage electricity on the street exploded, cutting off power to the entire block. The acting director quickly realized something was wrong and immediately ordered an assault on the bank. However, upon entry, they found that all the robbers had vanished. Fortunately, they managed to open the vault door at the last moment and rescued the unconscious hostages. It turned out that Elena had anticipated the police would open the vents to release the gas, which also opened an escape route for the robbers. The robbers had used the ventilation system to make their getaway. Everything was indeed part of Elena's plan. As the police were discussing the direction of the ventilation ducts, suddenly, money started raining down from the sky. The crowd surged forward to grab the money, creating chaos that blocked the police from pursuing the robbers. By the time the police broke through the crowd, all that was left were a few scarves from the robbers. Clearly, they had all escaped safely. However, Anderson had not yet been held accountable, and Elena wasn't going to let it go. After a tense but ultimately successful rescue operation, the police found themselves empty-handed, but they had safely rescued all the hostages. Val noticed that the woman trapped in the vault lived far from the bank. Logically, she shouldn't have been at this bank to be taken hostage. Knowing Elena's methods, Val suspected that nothing was coincidental, so she asked the woman. The woman revealed that Ming Li had left a number, 1164, before his death, though she didn't know what it meant. Val instantly realized that this was why Elena had locked her in the vault. Val found the safety deposit box numbered 1164, which contained Ming Li's laptop. There was a message written on it. Val immediately reported the evidence to Robert. According to the notes on the laptop, Ming Li had been investigating Anderson before his death. He discovered that news anchor Anderson was working for an underground organization called Balak. After finding out, Anderson had him silenced. DNA under the fingernails of the corpse confirmed Anderson's involvement, forcing him to confess to his crimes. Val successfully arrested Anderson. Elena then told Val that it was this Balak organization that had accidentally injured her husband Owen during the assassination attempt on her years ago. She seemed to be implying that the massacre of Elena's family many years ago was also linked to this Balak organization. The truth behind the bank heist was gradually coming to light, with Elena, stationed in the secret base, meticulously executing a plan that, within 3 days, took down Isaac, Roxanne, and then the editor-in-chief of CNN. Val recalled Elena's words. She began to develop a new perspective on Elena, but she still wasn't willing to concede. At that moment, the news of Anderson's arrest was broadcast on the giant screen in Times Square, New York. The crowd erupted in cheers, feeling that justice had been served. However, as the crowd cheered, the screen suddenly changed. After a series of successful takedowns, Elena's image had become almost heroic. Yet her ultimate goal remained unclear. Val discovered a USB drive left by her husband, Owen, and after applying noise reduction techniques, Val was shocked to hear that, aside from the chaotic gunfire, the woman's voice in the recording was her own. She quickly recalled a mission from years ago. Back in 2017 in Gambia, a group of terrorists had taken over a school, holding 3 teachers hostage. Val and her team were tasked with infiltrating to rescue them, but just as they were about to be exposed, a bullet flew out of nowhere, saving them. To this day, she still didn't know who had saved them. Even more puzzling was how this recording ended up in her husband Owen's possession. She knew Elena would eventually give her the answers, and Elena, in her relaxed manner, began telling her a story about cooperation. Meanwhile, in the first bank that had been taken over, the robbers were trying to break through the wall, and the loud noise alerted the police. Anthony suggested launching an immediate assault, but Captain Doak, frustrated by the previous failed attempts, believed that the failures were due to flawed strategies. He felt they couldn't act recklessly this time and should devise a careful operational strategy. So, he extended the perimeter by 2 blocks and cleared a path for the hostage rescue team. But just as the team was about to move in, the hostages suddenly ran out. By the time they stormed the building, the robbers had already vanished. When they discovered the breached tunnel, all the robbers had disappeared without a trace. Captain Doak had been outmaneuvered again, and in a fit of rage, he ordered Val to review all nearby surveillance footage. After all, the leader of these robbers was one of Elena's key operatives. However, Val believed that there must be a deeper reason behind Elena targeting this bank. Before she could finish speaking, an officer informed Doak that they had found a sophisticated circuit board. Sensing something was wrong, Val tried to warn Captain Doak, but he had already triggered a mechanism beneath his feet. A red laser wall suddenly appeared behind them. They were trapped. Captain Doak began to lose his composure. He was worried because the high-ranking officials Elena had taken down before were all exposed for their crimes in the end. He feared that he might be Elena's next target, and he began to agonize over whether he should confess his misdeeds. He called Robert, seeking to know if Elena had made any demands. Robert advised him to stay calm. After hanging up, Doak tried to reassure his team, pretending to be in control. As time passed, the space within the laser grid continued to shrink, and time was running out. Meanwhile, Elena casually applied her lipstick through the thick soundproof glass. Elena signaled to the FBI director to turn on the speaker. Robert was astonished to realize that Elena seemed to know everything happening outside. Even knowing Doak's name, he began to suspect that Elena could read lips. Val called in the bomb squad to try to disable the laser, but they were at a loss. The only option now was to quickly locate the robber who had set the mechanism. Val and Anthony immediately set off. They encountered the bank manager downstairs, and Val, familiar with Elena's methods, she had a hunch that the bank heist might be related to the bank manager. However, Anthony believed their top priority was to locate the head of the robbers and rescue the trapped Captain Doak. They analyzed the possible escape routes for the robbers. The usual routes had already been blocked by the police. Val suspected the robbers would try to escape by water. The two arrived at the dock, where the leader of the robbers, who had been at the bank earlier that morning, was standing nonchalantly, texting, as if waiting for them. Val warned him to raise his hands, but the robber casually tossed his phone into the sea. However, he also raised a grenade, indicating that he meant business. Through communication, Val learned that the robber wanted to speak with Elena. She immediately notified Robert, who looked at the note handed to him.
Tell her to instruct the SWAT snipers to blow the fugitive's brains out.
Stop!
It was clear that Elena could read lips. He held the phone up to Elena. After that, the robber surrendered.
Stand down.
And Val asked him how to deactivate the laser, but the robber merely smirked. Meanwhile, the laser wall was inching closer, forcing the 3 trapped officers to press against the wall. Screaming in fear, poor Captain Doak shut his eyes in agony, but as the laser passed, they were unharmed. Captain Doak had been fooled again. Elena's target wasn't him. Just when everyone thought it was a false alarm, a safe suddenly appeared on the wall behind them. Val recalled the bullet that had saved her life during the operation, a memory that still lingered vividly. And the person who had assisted Elena back then was the very robber she had just captured. During interrogation, the robber mentioned the Gambia recording, the same recording Val had listened to countless times without finding any clues. But one sentence from the robber sparked a realization.
We get so involved listening to the sound of our own voices that we miss the big picture.
Back at the base, she began to analyze the situation with Elena. Val mentioned that the gunfire in the recording was from the Gambia, where terrorists were massacring villagers. However, The sound of a Nikov submachine gun, commonly used in Gambia, wasn't as loud. Elena smiled in affirmation. The gunfire was heavy because they were using American M16s. Elena continued to guide her. At this point, it felt less like a confrontation between two opposing protagonists and more like Elena was gradually leading Val to grow. Their discussion was interrupted by a knock on the door from the director. Captain Doak had forcibly opened the safe. Inside were numerous hard drives and encrypted documents, clearly proving that the bank manager had been involved in international money laundering and arms trafficking crimes 10 years ago. It was him who had provided weapons to the Gambian warlords. It turned out that Elena's target this time was the bank manager. A photo on the wall caught Val's attention. Of the 7 people in the photo, Elena had already taken down 4. Val questioned Elena if the other people in the photo were her next targets, but Elena only hinted at it. At that moment, Robert interrupted their conversation, informing them that the diving team had retrieved the phone the robber had thrown away. The phone had been receiving messages from all over the country, but the messages were only in binary code, and the police were still investigating the meaning. Val seemed to understand something. Later that night, after Elena had fallen asleep, she went to the spot where Elena usually sat. Using that phone, she sent out a series of zeros and ones. To her surprise, the lights on the control panel began flashing in a pattern. She finally understood the secret behind Elena's control over everything. Elena was planning to target the Federal Reserve, which held 6,000 tons of gold, while being held in the U.S. secret base. She calmly sipped her tea as Special Agent Val continued to press her about her next target. Meanwhile, in New York City, the 6th Bank, which was the Federal Reserve holding the 6,000 tons of gold, was being hijacked. The mercenaries approached 2 hostages. These were no ordinary hostages. They were 2 members of the Federal Reserve's Board of Directors, and their biometric data could unlock the 3 vault doors. The robbers led the hostages to the underground security door, marked as Door 1, which was secured by a fingerprint lock. The first hostage successfully passed the verification. Then the other man was pushed forward. However, this man informed the robbers that all 3 board members had to be present simultaneously to open the door. The robber calmly pulled out a blue glove from his bag and swiped it across the screen. The robbers were well prepared. They had already obtained the fingerprint of the other board member. The police, realizing that the first layer of the security system had been breached, could no longer remain idle. The incident caught the attention of the president, and the chief of staff personally pressured them via video call, demanding a swift resolution if the 6,000 tons of gold in the vault were stolen or tampered with. And the news got out. Countries worldwide would start doubting the United States' ability to protect its assets, potentially shaking America's international standing. Val, having faced off with Elena multiple times, suspected that the remaining 2 people in the photo could be Elena's next targets. One of them, a long-haired man, was an engineering designer who had helped optimize the Federal Reserve security system 4 years ago. He must be the next target, and Val's intuition proved correct again. Val found the engineer, but before they could exchange a few words, 3 masked robbers appeared at the door. One robber rushed in with supplies, and Val, taking advantage of the moment, struck first and killed him. Another robber arrived shortly after, and after a shootout, Val ran out of ammo. In the critical moment, the engineer, hiding in the shadows, activated his home's smart system. The last robber directly found the engineer's hiding spot, but Val arrived in time to save him. Robert, upon hearing that Val had been attacked, angrily confronted Elena. It was clear that these 3 weak robbers were not working for Elena. For the first time, Elena, who had always been in control, seemed to sense an ominous feeling. The robbers were trying to open the vault door, while Officer Val brought the engineer back to the station to help find a way to stop the robbers from entering the vault. The engineer analyzed the bank's blueprints and discovered a non-load-bearing wall in the basement. They could breach it to infiltrate the vault and reboot the security system's server. By resetting the recorded data, they could prevent the robbers from gaining entry. Captain Doak and the engineer led the demolition team to begin the operation. On the other side, bad news arrived. The robbers had already reached the vault's second security door. This door used voice recognition technology, and the 2 hostages successfully passed the verification. To open this door, all 3 board members needed to be present. When it came time to verify the 3rd member, a robber smiled and pulled out a recording device from his bag. They had already recorded the 3rd member's voice. The second security door successfully opened, leaving only the final door, Door 3. Once this door was opened, the robbers would have access to the 6,000 tons of gold in the Federal Reserve's vault. Captain Doak panicked, but the security engineer calmly told him that unless the robbers could pull out the third board member's eyeball, they wouldn't be able to pass the retinal scan to unlock the third security door. At that moment, they had successfully infiltrated the server control room, but erasing the database would take a few more minutes. Meanwhile, Val was interrogating the robbers she had just knocked out. Based on the robbers' disdain for Elena and his arrogant attitude, Val believed he was telling the truth. He worked for the Bullock organization, but why would Bullock want to kill the engineer when the engineer was Elena's next target? Before Val could piece it together, the police security system issued a crisis alert. The robbers had successfully scanned the second retina outside the vault. Val tried to sync with Captain Doak via radio to update him on the robbers' movements. However, the radio communication was jammed, and Val immediately sensed something was wrong. On the other side of the vault, the engineer was anxiously working on his task. Once he completed it, the radio communication was restored, but it was too late. The engineer had already helped the robbers open the vault's final line of defense. The door to the U.S. Federal Reserve's vault was now open. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.